So in today's episode, we had Sam Ross, who is CEO of Numeral and an old growth friend. He previously ran growth at Numeral and Airbnb. This was a very interesting conversation where we leaned more tactical on performance marketing. And specifically, there was one interesting thread on how to apply D2C consumer marketing tactics to building a B2B business that I think got us to some really interesting territory.
Yeah, I think one of my big takeaways that Sam really spends a lot of time on is thinking much more tactically and avoiding the generalizations of what can work at any point in time for every channel. And he gives this analogy of how a lot of the product-driven founders are afraid of investing into growth. And I think that there's an important lesson there that I encourage everyone to listen to, how he thinks about investing in growth as a founder of a product, of a SaaS product.
Hope you enjoy it. Feedback welcome. Sam, thanks for joining. You've been a friend of mine and for over a decade now, and I think you've known Rishabh as well. You were initially doing growth at Teespring, where we kind of were running competing growth programs back when I was at Tilt. Airbnb, which ended up acquiring that company, and then you ran your own studio of brands, where we used to trade notes when I was an e-com marketer, and so it's been very fun knowing you on that journey, and now running Numeral, of course, which is sales tax software for e-com merchants and software startups. You continue to be a very talented marketer running that business. So I thought this will be an interesting conversation today. The common thread being, your role as a marketer around this journey, and of course we'll get into Numeral as well. But you've really sat on every side of the table in the e-commerce and marketing world, and so I think we'll have a lot to cover with you. So welcome.
Excited. Thank you guys for having me.
So maybe to kick it off, I want to talk about your journey from being a performance marketer to really becoming a full stack operator. So, to rewind, at Airbnb, you were reasonably early doing growth there. You added about $1 billion of GMV by really, and I say this in a positive way, like exploiting early days Facebook ad arbitrage. That was obviously the case at Teespring too. I think you all were really OGs to some of the precise last name targeting tactics that kind of propelled your growth early on, and we tried to do some of that at Tilt too. So maybe looking back, what were some of the benefits of business building via kind of these ad tactics, and what were some of the negatives? And maybe expanding from that, like, what's the best way to take advantage of paid media today?
Yeah, good question. So I think, to set the context, when I joined Teespring back in the day, which was this, very hyped company with, Sam Altman on the board and are coming in every week telling us we were going to be, us and Stripe were the next $10 billion companies. And, Keith Raboy on the board and Andreessen. So it was like this hype company. And really what happened there was it was a platform for selling t-shirts. So a little bit akin to Shopify. And as soon as the newsfeed ad came out on Facebook, the business just exploded because at that time, I don't know if you remember, Facebook, there was all these articles about how Facebook ads don't work. Procter and Gamble was cutting their spend. Everyone's like, this thing is a joke. Like Meta ad, or Facebook ads are a joke. But with Teespring, you could just reverse engineer all of its ad targeting. So they're a nurse, you could just say, I'm a nurse. Or as you said, we could do even crazier tactics where, we could scrape it and I could have an ad, hey, I'm a Mike and target all the mics. And so I think what we got a lot of learning is you could target all these sub kind of micro TAMs, target nurses, Chihuahua owners, people named Mike. And it was a lot of like demand testing. And so you really kind of got a feel for like what it's like to have, find kind of product market fit in a niche. And so I think you really got us. Yeah. It's this like pure capitalistic thing where you're really feeling like the demand curve. And, it was easy back then too, right? So you're getting conversions we were upset if our cost per conversion was over $10 and you're getting like 2 cent, 3 cent clicks. And so I think we just got a lot of exposure and learnings. And I think as a performance marketer, that's one thing you get is you just get so much there's just so much feedback you're constantly getting on what's working, what's not working. Whereas, you have people who've been doing brand marketing for years and running these award-winning campaigns for big companies, and like they honestly, like, there's no feedback. There's not really much of a feedback loop. They find out a couple quarters later and it's hard to correlate these things. And so I think you just were able to really get a lot of a feedback cycle, and similarly, Airbnb as well. Although it was always a little bit harder to measure when you're doing these things at a much bigger scale, where there's just a lot of other demand channels, and a lot more word of mouth.
So maybe let's stay in the Teespring example for a minute, because I think, it was working so well. At a certain point, it starts to decay, right? Like, what are the signs you're looking for? Or when did you know that it was not going to continue to work as well as it had been? And kind of what do you do in that moment?
Like the business broadly, or?
I'm talking about these tactics that you tapped into, namely like exploiting Meta ad or Facebook ads at the time so early.
Yeah, when I was there, what ultimately like hurt the business was Zuckerberg. Like we found out later, didn't like there was like a College Humor article, top 10 creepiest Facebook ads, and it was T-shirt ads with their name on it. It was number one. So literally there was a day where the whole platform, all the sellers' accounts got banned, and we found out later, Zuckerberg had his team make hard code different blockers for T-shirt ads to downrank them and stuff. And so we saw it get hard early, and I think, it took me a long time to realize, understand that, you can just having quick growth is not like the end all to things, because what happens is, you can get a ton of quick growth, but the faster you rise, the faster you fall if you don't have retention. I remember, after I left Airbnb, I decided to do digital nomad thing, live abroad. So I kind of just needed a quick asset-light business without investors. And I started selling this cheap jewelry online. And I remember coming to your office at Greylock. You're like, what are you doing? You're selling 50-cent jewelry from China for $50. What is this? To moms in the Midwest. And I was like, I don't know what the long-term thing is. But I didn't really put a lot of thought into it, because I figured how to cash flow it very quickly. And then I also remember, our friends hanging out with Gustav and Casey Winters, and they had there's these growth, they're the big kind of growth influencers, particularly at the time. And their whole thing was oh no, retention's so important. You got to think about retention for your business. And there's one of these, you hear these aphorisms like that, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I get that retention, but until you actually own a business and feel feel how painful churn is, So I sold tens of millions of dollars of jewelry, but then when all your customers churn and never come back, and you have to keep reacquiring them, then I think, you realize that, maybe there's some having, just being really good at Facebook ads, or really good at some, whatever ad tactic strategies, it's not sustainable unless your business is retained.
Let's stay on this for another minute, because I think it's, there are some important lessons here. These categories you were building in are not naturally retentive, right? So
yes.
Buying jewelry, T-shirts, you could still build a good business if you have that understanding up front. I think the issue is when you start paying as if these users are going to be retained. Knowing what you know now, would you have started in different categories? Would you have kind of managed to different ROAS expectations? What would you have done differently with this understanding of retention?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So, I think one example would be we knew that at Teespring, nurses were maybe the best category, because there was this weird demographic that they had a lot of disposable income, but they tend to just love to buy nurse gear. And so if you know that, you could either go, instead of selling a T-shirt, I love being a nurse, you could actually go and sell the scrubs and do what Figs did, and actually create a public company selling gear for nurses. Or my friend Lenny, I think who I knew at the time at Trusted Health, what he did was he'd worked at Hired, which was helping recruiting engineers, and we saw that I think when I talked with him about it, I'm oh man, nurses is this great category that loves to be on Facebook and click Facebook ads. So he basically built what Hired had done for nurses. And so again, you end up building these businesses that, okay, when I acquire a nurse for a T-shirt, I make $20 off of them. But if I acquire them to get a job, or I acquire them to be buying scrubs for the next 10 years, or build a foundational brand, you just the amount of value you get is so much more. And actually on the performance side, the interesting thing is you also can just spend way more, right? So when we're selling T-shirts and I know it's a one-time purchase, the problem is you have like your CAC has to be like $5 or $10. And so when the market moves, these things become more efficient. The cost acquisition gets more expensive over time, things like this. Eventually I couldn't sell my jewelry at a certain point because like just the cost to acquire customers became, the economics just didn't pencil out anymore. But if you're trying to acquire users for, it's going to be 10, 20 years, or it's this longer journey, and your LTV actually is a lifetime, it's a much different story. Or you sell more expensive goods too. You have the people like the 8 Sleeps of the world, etc., where I buy one of these $5,000 mattresses. Like maybe it won't be a 20-year customer, but $5,000 is a lot more than a $20 t-shirt or whatever. So I think you don't really see a lot of performance marketers selling $20, $30 items, whereas 10 years ago there was a lot more of that.
Yeah, totally. And just to sort of pivot off of this question of like, hey, those categories themselves have particular properties that are like not retentive in nature, but like let's use your business today, right? I messaged you over X about a bunch of your LinkedIn ads that I've been seeing, and so there's still some of that DNA around like paid media excellence coming into your business DNA today. What are some of the learnings you had over time? How does that play into how you think about growth today? Whether it's software like what you're doing with Numeral, or product businesses like the customers that we serve.
It's been a learning I think my career was mostly on consumer marketing and selling items where it's, again, I was very performance marketing focused. And so I could always measure everything very, pretty well. And it's a lot of tactics. I think for us, what we learned when we started doing some paid ads at Numeral was a couple things. I think one is I think a lot of founders are like, they hear all these horror stories of like spending money on like Google ads and how Google's like abusing them or things like that. And so they're scared to spend money. And I was just speaking to YC the other day, and I like a lot of these companies, they get their first 500K and they think they have to like covet it and be so careful with their money. But I'm like what's the point of just sitting on this money if you're not going to grow your business? Like the point is, the reason like you're on this venture capital like rat race or like treadmill is like you need to like deploy it. Like that's the whole point. And so I think I was always like a little bit more aggressive about deploying the funds. And you get to measure obviously how much you're getting back. And then I think the other thing is, there's always just like tactics that whatever tactics are working in like we've done stuff like whitelisting and things like this. And so I think, you always just like, there's a lot of learnings you get from doing DTC. So it's like so it's things like whitelisting. It's things like making your ads obvious, making the ads look native, not just doing some boring creative, right? Because so you'll see like, you'll see like ads on LinkedIn that are like, download your KPI checklist, and maybe it looks professional, but it's like the most boring ad and you scroll right past it. And any direct to consumer marketer would if that's what you're running for, if you're running some very boring generic ad for your DTC brand, like your brand's never going to succeed. You're going to die. You need to have like thumb stopping ads, as like Facebook used to call them. And so I think, there's always a balance, right? I think there's also this thing that's like ugly ads work. And so sometimes you have on a performance metric, they might. And so I think the difference you have to think about, obviously, with building a brand, and especially building something more where you have a sophisticated buyer. I'm selling to controllers at big fancy companies. Like they're not necessarily just because this tactic gets their attention doesn't mean it's going to convince them to go and make this big purchase and things like that. So I think I've had to adapt somewhat. And it's always a learning process too, because I think the hardest part is just like, it's way harder to measure things, and it's a lot more just trying to look at like crappy data and try to make, best guess decisions.
This is a very interesting point and it's obvious from a distance, but hearing you say it kind of crystallizes that the foundation of your marketing at Numeral is really rooted in your D2C DNA. And I mean, that's evident when you look at what you're doing on LinkedIn, like whitelisting other kind of influencer content. You're in e-com SaaS, which arguably has more kind of consumer-like properties than elsewhere. Do you think your approach works for other B2B categories? What advice might you have to other B2B founders that are inspired by what you're saying on the consumer growth side?
Yeah, I would say, it's hard to generalize any of this advice, but what I would say is you have a lot of these founders who It's like they come in, they're very like we Gustav invites us a lot of time to speak to YC companies, and they're like product visionaries. And then when it comes to like go to market, it's just like they delegate it away to someone. And in reality, like you have to like, there's like this whole founder mode thing. Like you want to be, most good founders, right? Like is any detail of you're obsessed about every detail of your product, and why is it like, I'm sure Rishabh has this thing, all right? You like get mad, like why was it designed like this? And you go and you write a whole spec and redesign it. And like I think you kind of have to have the same approach to a lot of your go-to-market. So even like our first channel that we worked on for go-to-market was cold email, and it was something I'd never done before. But at the same time, we just like took a really like intense approach to it. Like I did talk to a ton of people, and like we made everything super tailored, all the way we collected the data, all of this. So I think just like at a high level, like the thing with growth is it's very tactic heavy. Like, people try to like synthesize all these principles and that like stand test of time. And yeah, sure, there's a handful of principles, but like generally it's like, sadly, like it's a lot of tactics that like last for like 6 months and then you have to move on to the next. And so I think the challenge is, yeah, it's easy to want to delegate that away, or find, and then I also think a lot of the time the talent you're putting onto this is not top tier talent. So you might be, your product manager might be some, intense Stanford kid who's like high achieving and did all this and that and work. And then for your go to market, you just find someone who just like couldn't find another job and kind of fell their way into B2B, because B2B growth is like, particularly on the B2B side, people aren't like, oh, in college, what do you want to do? I want to be a B2B marketer. Like that's nobody's like dream. And so there's often just like a low, like it's not elite talent like wanting to do this stuff. And so you have to like really try hard to find good people. And like my strategy has always been like finding people who are incredibly talented and like training them and putting them into seat. So we have like 2 founders running our all of our growth efforts versus like, yeah, someone who's like a career B2B growth person.
So there's 2 questions that I want to explore separately, and this is awesome. The first one is, given, and I agree with you, by the way, on like it being very tactic heavy, and you have to be like very thoughtful about the details at like excruciating levels. You might find this interesting, so I'll share this story. Recently, for every inbound lead that we get, I have asked our team to send a response to the warm inbound within like X time, and then to send me a screenshot of the email that they send and of the email that they get back. And it must be screenshotted and posted in a public channel. And I'm like, as you were saying this, I was like, man, this is like, this is totally true. And people don't understand like how much everything is in the nuance. Given that, I am curious how you think about these various AI tools. So like the AI SDRs, the AI marketing email automation, and if you've tested them and why or why not for the growth side, because specifically on the growth side is where we've seen like an explosion of these AI tools. So that's one question. Mm-hmm. And then another one that I want to come back to is on the like hiring of a growth person. But yeah, let's start on the AI tooling. I'm very curious to get your take on it.
We kind of built all our so it started like AI SDR. So I built all my cold email infrastructure before there was a bunch of hype. And then all these tools came out in the market. You had, the things like 11x and all these things come out. And so I remember I jumped on the phone with the now disgraced founder of 11x. And I was like, well, like, hey, here's my stack. Like, why? Because I had some issues that weren't working. Like, should we use you? And he's like, oh no, your stack's like the same as ours. Like, we're using all the same tooling. We're basically just like inserting AI at small points. But it's basically like an agent. It's basically like an agency type model, but we kind of streamline things and we're calling it SaaS. And so I think some of these AI SDR tools, maybe they've evolved since I've last looked at them. But like my sense is, like they're doing some AI stuff at the margins, maybe to like write copy, and sure, we'll plug in different like AI things, maybe to like tailor copy to an extent, but a lot of it's not like it's fully owned AI. Like you're just giving the agent like autonomy and it's figuring things out. And so I don't know. I haven't personally encountered like these AI, maybe you've seen better stuff where it's just like, wow, this is like really owning the job end to end completely. It's a lot of the kind of like at the margin, it's making things slightly more tailored. And I think that's helpful. And that's, you always want to be using, again, these tactics are always evolving. You want to stay up to date with what's working, because that's how you get your alpha. And so, there's probably stuff I should be looking into more.
Yeah, I mean, I have unfortunately not found. I mean, I would love to find something. I want to be very clear, and I want these companies to work and be successful. Unfortunately, I have not found anything. So, and if I do, I'll let you know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's all these like AI chatbots on your website and like all these things, and I don't know. I still think until AI can like actually, it's like, I don't know if you like, Dwarkesh had a recent blog post about this where it's like, the problem with all these AI things is like your workers, they like get better over time. Like on your first week at work, they're not going to be good, but 6 months into the job, there's kind of this continual learning. They're continually building context. And the problem is every time you start the AI starts a conversation with something, it's kind of starting again with fresh content. You can try to context stuff it as much as you can, but like, it's not like continually getting better. So like maybe the AI SDR type tooling, it's like better than my SDR on like, my SDR for the first week or two. But once my our SDR has been in share for like 6 months, it's just going to be way better than any of the current AI tools. So I think eventually it'll probably get there, but there's this sort of like this paradigm shift that has to happen.
So you made a point earlier, and Rishabh was going to ask a question on, team composition and the changing nature of like what you're looking for in hires. And I think you made a point earlier that I strongly agree with, which is being overly planful with growth could really be detrimental, because ultimately like it's about how quickly you could experiment, iterate, learn, kind of move to the next tactic. And I think yes, you want like some guardrails or some process that actually ensures that your learnings are compounding, but actually like creating a 3 to 6 month roadmap or something, you're going to miss the window. And so like, I very much agree with you on that. And that's maybe one of the differences in kind of running growth versus traditional marketing. But as you're thinking about the changing nature of growth, have you thought about hires differently? Like, I'm with you. The best people I've hired in my previous seats were, like pirates. Like they were just, not necessarily pedigree. They tended to be highly analytical, but really just ran at stuff and didn't really ask for permission. So that's kind of an evergreen skill set, I guess. But like, what's changing now? Do your best growth hires today look different than they did 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, good question. I think, man, in the past, when you look at how teams were built, it was kind of like trying to accumulate all these specialists. So you hire your SEO guy or gal, you hire like the PPC person, you kind of like accumulate. And maybe at like bigger scale, there's like some level of this you have to do. But I think, first of all, I think teams are way more lean. You used to have like teams like the Machine Zone was famous, like performance marketing team. You would just like recruit these these banker kids and had like 50 of them like managing these like, in Excel all day. And it's like, I think you could probably run like a performance, budget, like billions, built a billion. You can probably run $1 billion budget with like a 4-person team or something today. Talking about AI, like where AI has been really effective is like how Meta and Google have deployed it for their ad systems. And that's probably like the biggest impact in like the GD and like the whole economy is like literally there for AI. And so maybe it's not like, LLMs, but it's some form of AI. And so I think it's a very high leverage. Like anyone doing growth is highly, highly leveraged. And I also think the difference between, like a 50th percentile controller and like an 80th percentile control or 90th percentile controller is not going to like change the trajectory of your business. I mean, it's good. You always want to hire the highest percentile, but like the difference between like a 50th percentile, like someone doing growth and like 90th is like actual, like your business, the trajectory of your business is changing. And even, so we hired our first head of growth was, I was searching for months, and like I just happened to have like my friend Nate, who's one of our angel investors, like 2-time YC founder, just emailed me. He's like, "Hey, I'm thinking of shutting down my company. I want to catch up." And I'm like then like I responded instantly, and like we gave him a job offer within like 2 days, and like I was like jumped on him, like I have to hire this person. And he did have some experience in SEO, so it's not like he had some context. But he also had a personal brand, and he was very well known in the YC community, so I could see that he like knew like, it wasn't that he had like growth. He'd never done paid ads. He hadn't done these things, but I was like, he had the right mindset for figuring out like how to capture attention, how to get stuff done. And then these things like paid ads these days can be learned pretty damn quickly. And so someone like me who had that experience, I was, I wasn't worried that we would like, he'd be like fumbling around. And then so as he got busier, there's a lot of stuff we needed kind of more engineering talent on. He was getting blocked. And so we had someone else in the org. This guy on my team, another like ex-founder who was like somewhat, was not like deployed a lot of production code, but was technical, studied CS and could code some. And so was working on some like other onboarding projects. And we're like, all right, this is like, you seem like you have the right skill set where you're very, very high agency. You just get, you hear like I think it's people that like you give them a small prompt, like, and like, like, hey, we like, so Nate, I was like, hey, my friend's doing all this, like these LinkedIn like influencer work, like you should look into it. And he comes back later and he's like, I have 10 influencers on LinkedIn lined up, like and it was just like some small prompt. And so similarly, Jonah on our team, who's more on the like sort of like growth engineering side, I explain the problem and I don't need to like micromanage the details. It's like sort of how like having mini founders within your company. I think again, because you need people that are going to be highly leveraged. That's what I found to be successful. Versus someone who has like deep years of experience and they're going to be able to like, talk about the differences between an ad group and a keyword and like a lot of stuff. Again, you can hire contractors and you should hire lots of contractors. So if I need a specialist on PPC, I don't need that to be in-house. I can hire a really smart contractor as long as I'm asking the right questions, I think. And it's someone you trust. And so I think you want to hire generalists who can also understand how all this stuff ties into your product, ties into the roadmap, things like this.
So this is a very particular type of like growth culture that you like to build. And I think that maps to actually the culture at many of the most successful growth teams. How does that extrapolate to other functions within Numeral?
I mean, I think broadly, like a big part of our culture is like everyone, we want them to be high ownership, high agency. Our job is to like, our clients have this like nasty problem of sales tax. They don't want to think, the whole like promise is like, don't like, we'll think like, stop worrying about it. Stop thinking about it. We'll think about the nasty details for you. And so I think broadly, like we always trying to push, like there's a really culture of ownership and high agency. I mean, I think all startups need this, but like that's something that we just think about a lot. And we've also hired a lot of like founders. We just acqui-hired like another YC startup Ruby card, three YC founders, and I think they're all incredible engineers, but like we didn't hire them just because they're good engineers. Like I knew them from the batch. Like they just hustle, they figure stuff out, they're creative thinking, and I think we don't have any PMs in the entire company, and we're like a 60-person company. It's because like good engineers I think can do a lot of that PM work, or good designers can do a lot of that PM work, and so I think again I'm probably like overly, but I tend to hire generalists, like, and that's like it's cognitive bias that I've like actually tried to like maybe like I need to like slow down on a bit, but like I think broadly I tend to be attracted to people who can like make connections across things and are not just stuck in their lane, because I find that people that are stuck in their lane, they may be really good specialists, but then they have trouble like pulling in insights from other teams and working cross-functionally.
And just to like empathize, interestingly, we have only one PM at the company, and like 75 people. So I can totally relate and agree with that. I'm curious to learn more about how you think about Numeral, like Numeral's product as you continue to grow. And when you made this statement about like a controller, 50th percentile controller, 90th percentile controller is not going to like massively inflect your business. And, I would suggest that you guys are there to make sure that like, hey, the back office, we will take care of for you. Like, you don't have to worry about it. When you think about the vision of like, hey, you don't have to worry about it, how do you think about painting what the product has to evolve into over time? And how much of that becomes like, for lack of a better framing, like agentic in nature, in terms of like your entire backend can be agentic, and actually you don't need to worry about it, or do you have a different vision for how you move from sales tax into other ways that it helps improve your business, and then the leverage that your software provides to that business over time?
Great question. I love that. I think so. Our business, we help startups and e-commerce companies with their sales tax compliance. And one problem I had with, so I was the way I found this problem set is I was running a bunch of my own e-commerce businesses, still own a vitamin gummy business, does about 10 million a year in sales. And so while running it, I had to go use these incumbent tools. The famous one is this company called Avalara. They're owned by private equity now, going public again soon, actually. And what I found is they were selling me a tool to solve sales tax. And I was like, I'm a founder of a DTC brand. I want to spend my time on Facebook ads. I want to spend my time on product development. I don't want to log into this tool and try to understand the nuance of West Virginia's tax. I was literally on the phone with West Virginia at one point, yelling at some poor woman there about some penalty waiver. And I'm like, I really want a service. So, and so I think for a lot of categories, where I think we're going to see is instead of selling you a tool, you'll be sold more of a service. And so a lot of the ways it works in sales taxes, as you get bigger, you might hire an accounting firm or some sales tax consultant, and then they manage the Avalara tool for you. And I don't think you'll need these kind of at the edge services anymore. So maybe it's similar for CRO, right? I hire some CRO agency that, in your space, and then they manage, some tool, some landing page builder tool. It should all be consolidated down to one. So I think you're going to start seeing some merging of services and software. And so I think broadly, that's the pitch of Numeral. It's hey, you get physical mail from the States, we'll scan it, we'll read it. Again, AI is doing a lot of this work in the back end, but for you, you don't care as a user. We'll call states on your behalf, things like this. And so all those small things just go away. And so a busy controller can go and spend very little time on it. Just kind of runs in the background, and then they get more leverage on their time. And so as we evolve, we kind of continue to add this in. We're starting to really now focus on, particularly for SaaS businesses, international markets. And so again, you talk to how does a big SaaS company handle international sales tax? And they have 6 or 7 different accounting firms across the world. They're working with, KPMG Korea, some other firm in Kosovo, and you manage all these different service vendors. You manage all these different softwares, and again, I think everyone's trying to get more leverage on their time. That's how the economy gets more productive, and you have leaner balance sheets. And so I think broadly, that's the direction we're going. Is it feels like a service, but most of what's powering it is software. And then a lot of that, and then the reason you can now compete with service businesses is because AI lets you, it can read the mail, it can it can do a lot of these, it can figure out what category of product you're selling, things like this.
Do you think that becomes the expectation? So enough companies do this, and all of a sudden the rest don't have a choice, right? Essentially at some point we get to the point at which, yes, there's a set of things that can remain as quote unquote tools, like your email, but enough companies do this, and you flip, right? Do you think we flip? And if you think we flip, at what point do you think we flip? And sort of what would you say to other founders?
Yeah, I think it depends on the category, right? So some some categories, maybe it's always going to be a tool because it's I think if the function is something it's really core, you really need to own it in-house for some reason. Maybe Figma, maybe I guess the AI uses a service firm to do that. So I don't even know. So yeah, I think but I think certainly anywhere that you tend to hire an agency to do work for you. I mean, even you can even see, we're talking about Facebook ads, right? In the past, you had to hire an agency to go, and they weren't even doing the creatives. All they were doing was moving budget around between ads. And now someone on your team can set up a Facebook ad much simpler. And so I think, yeah, the bar is always getting raised for what you have to do in software. The expectation, I think people often ignore this. The expectation of what the software was 20 years ago was way lower. You can have a really crappy piece of software, but because the competition was service firms doing things by hand or things like that, even just having something just good enough, and the bar is always going higher. And so I think, yeah, I think if in your industry there's services firms that like, or implementation specialists or things like this that manage, that tend to, often make it easier for your software, you need to figure out how to like close that gap and be able to deliver that. And I think you might have to, it could be a change in the business model broadly too. Like some of these, even if AI can't do it, you might just have to like have more services with your business and take lower margins. But if that's just like what the customer expects, you might have to do it. Now, I don't really want to manage a big services firm. That sounds like a headache. I've run mini agencies before, and I don't like doing that. But you have to meet the customer where they are.
Yeah, I was going to ask about this topic. Like, it's a very zeitgeisty topic in kind of AI software right now. I think for good reason. Like replacing spend on services is happening, I think, faster than many people had anticipated. In your industry, like I think the value prop for Numeral is very clear, and what you're saying makes complete sense. How do you actually staff the team to support some of these transitions? I know you said you don't want to run a massive services arm, but what are the right levels to invest in that right now? And how do you think about either leaning further into that or weaning off?
Yeah, good question. I think, it's hard. You're always trying, I think all founders right now are thinking like, how do I insert more AI into my business and automate these workflows? And so, when we started our business, we were doing, I think I talked to you earlier, we were doing everything by hand. I didn't even have we didn't even have and we had basically no software when we started. We were just doing filings by hand. I had, my team. Yeah, I had a team in the Philippines I had worked with when I used to sell T-shirts. I hired this guy for $3 an hour to design T-shirts for me a decade ago. Then I had him now, submitting tax filings in Alabama's portal, and so I think over time we built up a large international team just to quickly like bootstrap stuff and kind of get just brute force and get stuff off the ground. And so now we finally automated all that work, and a lot of it is just automating without AI. It's just the state finally gave us access to their API or SFTP portal, whatever, and we can automate. But there's a lot of states that don't have anything like that, and so we've had to do a lot of work with these browser agents. We use browser-based and go and do that. And so we've eliminated, it was something like 30, the last 3 months, like something like 30 full-time roles just with, a lot of it's just like data entry, but still it got the job done. Or similarly, I had two guys that were reading physical mail for all of our clients and like trying to categorize it. And they were getting overwhelmed. They're like, hey, we need to 3x our team in the next month or two because we were adding a bunch of clients, or else we're going to die. And so my co-founder Matt is like, what the hell? Like, we can't keep adding folks abroad. And so we actually, with that, a lot of it's just prompt engineering. It wasn't like we had to build crazy sophisticated tooling, but like all of a sudden we could automatically go and categorize thousands of pieces of mail that were coming in each week. And I think there's still parts of our business where there's human operations, but I think you just take a hammer to it and each week, each month, you find ways to automate. And there's some things that frankly, the technology is not quite there yet. And, I think you just keep a close eye on it. And, these things keep getting better and the capabilities keep getting better. The infrastructure keeps getting better. But it's a hard balance because, I think as you're building a startup, you get requests from clients. You want to be able to serve them. You want to be able to, again, our pitch and my vision is if the client has a headache here, sometimes the team will be like, hey, should we do this? I don't want to do this. This sounds like a pain. And I'm like, no, that's like the whole thing we sold them. That's the whole point. We have to go do the painful stuff. And so it's a big tension we think about a lot. And there's, I don't have a clear answer for everything.
Are there other opportunities? I mean, you're sitting in the midst of, a pretty interesting topic in kind of finance and compliance right now, which, there's a bunch of opportunities for AI to kind of inject into compliance related problems. What opportunities do you think are under discussed? And maybe, we could zoom out a little bit from Numeral in the tax space and just more broadly within finance ops and compliance. What are you seeing that you think is ripe?
Yeah, I'm so probably focused on my little niche of the world. I don't have a great vision, but I would say broadly what I've seen is I think compliance specifically is a really good area right now where, anywhere there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of rote, fairly deterministic decisions having to be made, tends to be there's a lot of room where, you have a lot of back office workers, or you have people doing low-level work. I think anywhere that you have, huge swaths of team abroad doing kind of, again, work that doesn't require like complex decision making, is probably pretty ripe. I think, yeah, the advantage AI gives you too, especially anywhere that you want speed too, right? So like we could have our team doing having our team doing manual filings. A lot of the problem we were solving for was not even like a cost saving problem or even accuracy problem. A lot of it was like speed. Because now, again, instead of having to wait, like, okay, we have to get all our filings done every month by a certain due date, but now it's like a single button, the filings is done instantly. So I think areas that like having more speed on compliance, I think there's probably a lot of interesting opportunity.
Yeah, that's incredible. I was curious about a little bit about your past. I know Mike has had the privilege of like seeing more of your journey over time, and so I'm curious. When you were running like the House of Brands, it was like roughly at a time where there was like a bunch of other like large aggregators that got stood up, right?
Yeah.
I wonder like how did you think about that model, and how do you think about that model now more recently, as like the ecosystem shakes out?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, I looked very closely. I had a whole pitch deck of like doing this model, and I even almost joined my friend as like a co-founder where they raised tens of millions doing this model. So I looked very closely at it at the time. I think the promise that was exciting, right, is like whenever you find a new private equity asset class, like the first movers can make a crazy amount of money rolling things up. And so I think, there was a lot of like on paper why it was exciting. I think there was a couple of things that went wrong there. I think one is you have this sort of like adverse selection bias. You see that even with like open door, where it's like the people most likely wanting to sell their businesses are the ones that probably like know that like you want to sell it when you don't have a lot of confidence in that business and you think it's going to go wrong. And so I think a lot like whereas the founders who are really bullish on their business are probably the least likely to want to sell. And so I think you had that problem. And I also think there was this promise that you'd get all this operational leverage, or I could have like one team manage 5 or 6 different brands. But I think you actually requires a lot of focus to get this stuff right. Especially again, I think maybe doing this for like a business with high retention, like SaaS or even dentist offices or HVAC companies, things whatever. Like it tends to be it's maybe easier and you're just kind of creating operational leverage. But a lot of these brands, they were probably run fairly well, and there wasn't like a lot of low hanging fruit to improve them. Like I remember my friend, he acquired this Amazon business. It was selling some commodity thing like staples or something like, selling just like super commodity. But he was ranking number 1 on Amazon on all these keywords, and so he was selling a ton. And then as soon as like my friend bought it, like the rank dropped, and he like called the guy, and he's like, how come the rank dropped? The guy's like, oh, I have like this like list of like 30 tactics I do like every day. If I fall number 2 on Amazon, I have to like go buy a bunch of fake orders and use these like sketchy black hat tools to get it back up to number 1. And like if you're a founder and like you really care about the cash flow, you're going to do all this insane tactics to get it to work. But as soon as it's owned by some employee who doesn't care, like it's not going to work. So there's probably other reasons, obviously interest rates, etc. I don't think like the opportunity, there's probably still like different cuts of it where there's opportunities, buying bankrupt businesses. I see some operators doing this quite well, or maybe trying to pull together. Again, I think the problem also is like e-commerce is this very broad topic, and it's like, is it real? It's not necessarily like I don't know if e-commerce is even like an industry. It's almost more like e-commerce is like a way of selling. But like, what does like 8 Sleep mattresses have to do with some like Olapop sparkling water, whatever? Like they're very different. And so I think maybe if you focus on a certain vertical or things like that. The other thing too is I think e-commerce, I think in the past you could operate these businesses with not a lot of discipline, but like if you were just really good at growth and marketing, it kind of covered for everything else because you're acquiring customers so cheap, and you might not have that efficient operation. Where I think now these businesses, it's a lot more a competitive advantage to actually be really good on the supply side, which is interesting. So maybe there's something there if you're really strong at some supply side thing and you can get some operating leverage that way.
Yeah, that last point is very interesting and resonant. And maybe I think one of the premises that these roll-ups kind of started on, or at least the ones that I spent time with, was that there would be some, audience overlap, and kind of like outside of removing costs from your marketing org, having one centralized marketing org, actually be able to cross-sell. And like that thesis, you should have, lower CAC and essentially higher retention across your portfolio of brands. I'm not sure that really panned out. And I'm curious, like, you don't buy that thesis? Like, do you think there's anything there? Or at this point, is it, hey, Meta's doing the lookalikes anyway for you, there's not really much of a benefit in kind of doing the cross marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't buy that. I don't know. I've always been someone like, it's like, yeah, you turn on your email, you turn on your SMS, but that's never like the key driver. It's always like number 3, number 4, like reason your business is growing. And so like at the margin, that stuff's nice to be able to cross sell, but I don't think that's like a gate. Like ultimately, all these brands are just like, they're addicted to the Zuck's heroin, and like you can't, until like someone else figures something else out there. Like these things are like nice on paper and look good on a pitch deck, but if you talk to a real founder like that's actually sold these things, they'll be skeptical, I think.
So maybe let's spend the last few minutes here going deeper on a couple of the tactics. And I think, feel free to not give away all your secrets, but I think it's been very clear to me that you've tapped into LinkedIn as a really powerful kind of growth channel. And that's, that in itself is not unique, but I think the way you're running it is unique. And so maybe talk to us about, maybe at the highest level, like what's one marketing channel you believe is going to be like 10x as important as today within the next 5 years? And maybe what's one that you think will only be 10% as important?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, I'm always, whenever's working for me, I'm always like, I'll tell you in 6 months, I'll tell you in a year from now. I would say, like, looking out to the future, I don't know. I don't think there's like any obvious things that we see right now to me that it's like, this is the trend, this is going to change. My guess would be is like generative AI allows for some new, what's the next TikTok, what's the next, kind of social media app, and I'm really focused on the media side of it versus the social side. Meaning, like, I think, as we're able to like generate content much cheaper and easier, there'll probably be just different, it's like, how are people spending their time during the day? And there probably should be different apps on your phone that you're going to be spending time on. And so I think I would like look out for whatever starts growing there. And then as soon as something like that monetizes, often there'll be probably a lot of opportunity there. At the margin, it seems like people are shockingly spending more time on their LinkedIn feed, which is like, it's super unsexy. Like everyone like makes fun of it, but like it's, a lot of people spend a lot of time there. And so, we've invested on that and taking a whole series, tons of different tactics you end up doing there on the ad side, on the organic side. I think like in broad strokes, again, I think our approach has been, don't create boring content that you're going to scroll right through. Like, try to create stuff that's engaging. I think it's always a little dangerous. Sometimes, we'll post stuff that's like a little at the edge of like maybe like what's appropriate or what's, is this really like good for our brand? And, so I think we're spending some more time right now thinking about how we reconcile, creating engaging content that's humorous and fun, but like, you have a brand like Cluely where they're really good at getting attention. But like, I think a lot of people are like, these guys are like jokesters and I'm never going to use their product. And ultimately, like, the goal isn't to get impressions, it's to get people to like actually go and use your product and have some respect for what you're building. And so yeah,
that's super interesting. I was wondering, we actually recently talked to Brian Kano, who I guess similar to you, is thinking a lot about like how he's going to use like Gen AI tools to inform his like marketing processes and what types of content he's producing and things like what is catchy, what is in the zeitgeist. And a lot of this, like the way you're talking about it feels like, and your own background is like you're borrowing consumer tactics and bringing them into B2B.
That's right.
As you do that, like how do you think about the assist? Like, what are the mechanisms that you have found that are kind of interesting assist mechanisms of using some of these AI tools to like come up with some interesting ideas, right? So without giving away any particular tactic, like, hey, like this particular idea of a creative or this particular thing, like, hey, here's a way in which I thought about it and how these tools enabled me to tap into something special here.
To be honest, I don't know if we're using a lot of AI for right now. I think, we've thought about it for more like content generation or content creation, but I think ultimately, the quality of content you can produce right now is still below the bar of like something that we could write ourselves. But I do think, going off your point about the zeitgeist, I think one thing that's interesting is, again, we're talking about like the level of expectation for software has gone up, but I also think the level of expectation for like your marketing as a SaaS founder has gone up. You can't, in the past, again, it's always a joke at like these B2B SaaS companies, how cheesy and bad their marketing is. We like our competitor Avalara, like it's just this big orange, ugly company. You see them at the trade shows. It's like so cringy and embarrassing. And so I think like the bar is always going up everywhere, right? We're in like a purely capitalist ecosystem. And so I think more and more, I think a lot of these SaaS companies are taking, consumers always, I think, at the forefront, at the avant-garde of marketing. And so I think you're going to start seeing a lot of these SaaS businesses, because they're, they have a lot of money, they have to compete, are trying to take more and more a page from consumer brands.
Maybe one last question to wrap here. So we've spent, I think one of the themes of this conversation has been taking consumer marketing tactics and applying them to your B2B space. If you flip that, like what have you learned in the B2B world that you think would make you a better consumer marketer today?
Good question. I think a couple things. So I think one is just like B2B teaches you, again, I keep harkening on this, but like retention is like the only thing that ends up mattering. And so like if I start another consumer company, I remember I started off, I sold jewelry and I sold like $30 million of jewelry, but like almost zero retention, like insane. Like people would like they'd search for like gift for my daughter's piano teacher. We'd have a perfectly designed jewelry. It says like, to my piano teacher. And so like we were able to like, have all these like growth hacks, but like they would never buy another necklace from us ever again. And so I was like, okay, I need to build something more retentive. And we started selling supplements online, vitamin gummies. We're like, wow, our average will buy like 3 or 4 times from us. That's amazing. But then at the end of the year, like 90% of your customers have churned. And so now to go to a business where, 95+% of my customers are still there at the end of the year, you just see like you really understand compounding. And so I think, I don't know, to me, it's a little bit like anytime I do a consumer business, I'm going to like be like I'd be so obsessed around retention and like almost not even think about anything else from there. In terms of the marketing, I think it's a good question. I don't know if I have a lot of obvious stuff. I think the biggest thing is I've just gotten more comfortable with doing things that I can't measure well. And just like having more, like, whereas like when I was doing, you're running an e-com brand, you can measure things so well. It's easy just to like only invest in the kind of like anywhere you can measure a CPA. And so you end up spending all your money on Meta and Google or wherever it is. And then you just never spend any money on brand marketing. We used to always like, a lot of performance marketers like trash, it's like this like war between the brand marketers and performance marketers, and they each think they're idiots. And so I think I've learned a lot more to like there's just certain things we've done. You're like, wow, that definitely worked. And so I think being able to take more of a leap of faith and trust that sometimes, doing certain sponsorships or certain other like tactics or that you can't measure, like just like taking faith in that, I think has been a learning for me. And again, that's a me thing. It's like, it's not like all consumer, but it's like performance focused consumers.
Sam, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I'm excited to check in 6 months once your current portfolio is decayed and you're on to the next. And so
I'll
always fun chatting with you. Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Sam.
Good to
Bye.
Thanks, man.